If you want to know how we got from this to that, make sure to check out this video.
Art of Drumming is not just a YouTube channel, but also a free platform where you can find numerous drum-related courses filmed by major international artists. Head on over and join our growing community.
Hey Art of Drumming community, Andy here once again, and today it's all about the makeover of a pretty cheap snare drum. For this video we ordered one of the cheapest aluminum snares available at the moment, and it's a Millenium Aluminator 14 by 5.5 with just a bit over 100 euros. This snare is actually pretty cheap, and for a seamless aluminum shell that's a very good price. So let's see what we can get out of it, what we can do with installing some new drum heads, checking out different snare wires. But before we get into that, let's unpack the snare drum and check out what it sounds like right out of the box. So right out of the box, the snare has a pretty undefined tone with a lot of overtones. You also can tell that the snare wires are more mid-frequent heavy and not as crisp as you might want to have them. Now, throughout the video we're gonna change a few things like drum heads, snare wires, tuning, and for all the playing sequences, the miking and also the processing stays the same. So now let's get started by investing some time in tuning the drum. Let's begin with the reso head. Easiest way to do this is you take one drumstick, slide it under the snare wires, and so you have free access to the reso head. Now, as you can tell, the tuning of the reso head, the way it came out of the box, is not that high, and I'm just gonna crank it up a little to get a more defined snare articulation. I'm making sure that all the lugs are in the same tension, in the same tuning range, and now that I'm happy, I'm just gonna flip the snare back over and I'm gonna take care of the better head. Let's just bring it up in a medium-high tuning range. Now I'm also gonna dial in the snare wires. Best way to do this is just loosening them and tapping on the better head and slowly increasing the tension of the snare wires until you feel that the response of the snares is just in the range where you want it to be. Now that we've got the snare in a reasonable tuning, let's check out what it sounds like with the stock heads still on with the stock snare wires, just with some tuning done to the snare. The tuning really changed a lot. So even though the drum sounds pretty good at the moment, you can already tell that the drum heads are pretty cheap. The coating is already wearing off after just a few minutes of playing, you can clearly feel that. And also you're getting stick marks in the center of the drum after just like 3 or 4 minutes of playing. Let's bring in a new drum head. We're going to use a Evans UV1, a single ply drum head with a special UV coating. And let's also change the reso head for an Evans snare side 300. And then let's check out what this does to the snare. When I removed the stock head, I was surprised how heavy the drum head feels and also how dead it sounds right away. It sounds actually like it's a pre-muffled, pre-dampened drum head, but it's a single ply head. That's totally different with the UV1, and it will bring a more open quality to the drum. The same also can be said for the reso head. The stock reso head also feels a little thicker than the Evans one that is on the snare now. And right from the start, when I started tapping on the drum head, you can really see how sensitive the snare has become. It's still the same snare wires. The only thing that changes is the reso head. Before we changed the drum heads, I checked the tuning of the drum with our tunebot, and I brought the new drum heads to the same pitch as the ones before. So we have 300 Hz on the better side and 400 Hz on the reso side. So now in a direct comparison, let's hear the snare with the stock heads and then with the Evans UV1 and the snare side 300. The drum heads really changed a lot. Now you have a more open quality. You also get a little more body from the snare, so it resonates more. And the snare actually sounds like a decent instrument, so you can really use it in many scenarios. With aluminum drums in general, like the legendary Acrolite for example, you're often looking for a drier sound. So let's add one of my favorite muffling tools, the Mini Muff, and check out if the snare with this tuning and those drum heads works in a pretty muffled scenario. So with just some tuning, some new drum heads and a little muffling tool, you can make this snare drum a totally different instrument. The next step I want to talk about is what happens if we bring in new snare wires. In this section, I do not only want to show you what new snare wires can do to your snare, but I also want to give you an idea of what different snare wire models can do to your sound. That's why I brought in a 20 strand snare wire, a 16 strand, they call it equalizer, with this gap in the middle, and also a pretty wide 30 strand model. The stock wires on this snare are also 20 strand. So we're gonna start with the stock model, then the 20 strand, the 30 strand, and then the equalizer. It's amazing to see how a small detail like the number of snare wires can really change the abilities of this instrument. While the equalizer model gives you a lot of definition and control, the Super 30, the 30 strand model, gives you a lot of body and sustain. So for example, for a very low tune snare where you want a bit of sustain from the snare wires, for a like sound, the Super 30 will work great. And this is what we're gonna do next. We had the snare in a medium tuning for the whole video, and now I want to check out what this instrument is capable of. So we're gonna have it once in a muffled, very low, super fat tuning, and once in a very high and very open one for like funk or reggae play. So let's start with a very low and very fat snare sound. For this one, I'm gonna lower the tension on all tension rods. I'm just gonna tune down the snare. I'm gonna loosen the snare wires a little, and I'm gonna use the Super 30, this 30 strand model for this one. And also I will bring in 2 mini muffs to just kill all overtones and shorten the sustain a lot. Now let's go from this very low tuning to a super high and open tuning. So the first thing to do is get rid of the muffling, and then I'm just gonna go around the drum and crank up the head. Also with the high tuning and for a funk-like context, I want a very controlled and very direct sound with short snare wires. So I'm gonna bring back the equalizer for this one, and here is what it sounds like. So now, just as a little recap, we started with this exact snare drum that came right out of the box. We placed it here, we played it, we listened to it, it sounded like a 100 euro snare drum. And now with new drum heads, with new snare wires, with different tuning options, this snare drum sounds a lot more expensive than it was. So it's definitely worth investing in new drum heads, in also new snare wires, and also spending some time checking out the tuning range of your drum, checking out where it works best and where you like your own instrument. So now let us know in the comments which options did you like the most, which snare wires would you prefer, and also what do you think, in which tuning range does this snare drum work best? Have fun playing around with all those ideas on your own with your own snare drum, and also make sure to subscribe to our channel for more videos like this one in the future.